the spring flowers full of bees, the early sunshine, the birds.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of QTube with the Q Reviews. And today we are being joined by Canadian, and I would say singer-songwriter artist, but I'd also say composer, and we'll talk a little bit about that because there's a new album. But joining us all the way from glorious Toronto, Ontario, Dinah Thorpe. Hello, Dinah, how are you?
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I can imagine brand new album For the Birds. And I was trying to be cheeky. I was just like, how could I, line up this little kind of cool intro with For the Birds? And I'm like, it's kind of already done for me. But the album is out, For the Birds, and it's pretty stunning. I have to say, I will say that off the top. For anybody who's watching this, you should go out, you should get it, you should listen to it. And my recommendation is if you're going for a long drive where you're not going to be interrupted, that's okay in the car. But really, it's nice to sit with this album and just listen to it because people talk about light and shade, but there's a lot of light and shade here. And when it is light, it is just beaming. And when you go into those soft moments, they're just gorgeous. So birds, I know that you seem to have a preoccupation with them, but you've been writing this album for a while. Tell us about that whole journey with it.
Yeah, so the birds thing was kind of an accident. It only came about because I realized that there were 3 different songs that reference birds directly. One of which is so Whippoorwill has an actual sample of a whippoorwill that I recorded a bunch of summers ago. And then as you may or may not have seen, I realized what For the Birds actually means, which is basically a pile of horse poo in the streets. And that just seemed like a really fitting name for a piece of art, in this day and age.
And I know that I've read that, the more that you kind of looked at For the Birds as an expression, that there's various different meanings and, that things kind of came to you. Spring Flowers being the first single that was off of it. And when I was talking about that light and shade bit, it's really beautiful how you enter a lot of these songs and it's very quiet and it's just, you have such a beautiful texture to your voice. And it's kind of earthy and deep. And then you get into some fantastic electro sounds and that's what I meant by composing. A lot of these sounds and the way that you're kind of layering things you just mentioned about the whippoorwill is using natural sounds, using very different sounds. The album I know, I think you wrote, I think about 6 years, some of them ago. How did, kind of getting to this point, what was the challenge, I guess? And was it just as the songs kind of came along, or you were just taking your time with them, or was it you were looking for something different? Was there a master plan to the album, or was it just kind of like as it kind of came?
Thank you. It's a good question, and there's a lot of pieces in it. I think I did think about this album as an album for longer than I did any of my other ones. So probably I've been thinking of it as an album for 2 years. But that also involved throwing out a lot of songs, like probably as many as I threw out. And I mean, obviously I also have to make a living, and it's not the only thing I've done over the last 6 years. But yeah, interesting to work on something for so long. And also because of thinking of it as an album, I also thought about the album artwork and what kind of cover shoot to do. And so basically it's a distillation of my life over the last 6 years. And I think the kind of contrast that you're talking about I think is the more recent work, where it's kind of quiet and then comes in kind of bursts, and then there's like crazy noise and distortion. I think that stuff is more recent. And also the songs where, including the Spring Flowers, where it seemed like I needed to start singing right away. I think for a while it took me a little bit to be like, oh, I can do this. This is what this song wants. Because I think we're kind of programmed to be like, no, we need 2 or 4 bars of something first. But then, you know, if you're in COVID times, especially, it's kind of like the Spring Flowers, like, okay, you know, we need to get to this right away. And so that's kind of a long-winded answer, you know, that some of I think you can probably tell if you listen carefully, and I appreciate that you did and that you're encouraging people to. I think you can probably tell what's newer and what's older, and not just from the lyrics, but from the kind of frantic. The newer stuff is kind of more frantic.
But it's a frantic that works, really, it does. I think that you're right. We are kind of conditioned to expect off the top of the song, there's got to be, at least a 10 to 15 second intro to kind of prep people, as if we can't just deal with the human voice right off the cuff. It almost is startling in a way, because we're so not used to it. But the quiet, and even just when you use some like soft sounds and just like kind of like minor sounds, kind of in the background, it really, really works, because it really showcases you, first of all, because I mean, again, your own instrument in your vocals are the texture, and just is so beautiful. But what it does is it does set you up for that kind of like, all right, now we're going to switch gears. Mm-hmm. And for me, with music, I like to be kind of lurched out of my comfort zones with things. I think that's kind of a little bit of the magic of music, that you can go in such quick directions. Listening to pipes, and I'm not sure if it's a recorder or a version of a recorder that's in there. We expect to hear, when we hear pipes, we expect to hear a certain sound. And using that instrument became, it's almost like I wanted to go to Scotland, but I wasn't going to Scotland, because it was, so it played with that a little bit. And when you're sitting down and you're writing and you're thinking about the instrumentation that you want to include in this, again, because we are a society that is so used to certain sounds, because that's what we do with the radio, and we don't challenge ourselves to listen deeper or listen like broader. When you get in there and you're thinking about sounds versus the lyrics, what makes you go to a sound like that, rather than, say, a traditional bagpipe kind of sound or whatnot? But how do you choose your own journey with the instruments, I guess?
Yeah, it's funny that you are thinking of it as kind of not a bagpipe, because when I found that sound, and it's a synth sound, it's like a softer instrument sound, to me it sounded a lot like bagpipes. And I thought, oh, this is something I've never worked with before. I mean, I like sounds that sound like, where you can kind of hear the air coming through them. So it's, you can tell that it's electronic, but you can also sort of hear the air coming through it. And I think it, in terms of strategy, I don't really have one. I think recently I've been kind of letting myself have a little bit more freedom in terms of, if songs want to be instrumentals, like, that song clearly wanted to be an instrumental. It wanted to be fast, it wanted to be short, and it wanted to be an instrumental. But I think in terms of like wearing a composer ribbon, or like, someone anointing me, I think when you first start as a singer-songwriter, you feel like if you're going to write instrumentals, someone has to tell you that you can write instrumentals, that you're good enough to write instrumentals. And I think for me, it's kind of like, sometimes I just get in there and it turns out to be an instrumental. And I think in terms of sound choice, that song is similar to what I do in general, which is that there's something that sounds sort of organic, and then there are like crazy, hard, deep and heavy club beats, right? Which is a direction that I love to go. And I think that song in particular, which comes out of COVID times, it's a feeling, right? For me, it's a feeling. Like, songwriting for me is about a feeling. And I think, to speak to your excellent point about, structuring songs for the radio, or structuring songs because it's how we're supposed to do it. I remember when I was taking some sound school courses that one of the teachers was like, well, then you have to do your verse, and then you have to do your pre-chorus, and then you have to do your chorus. And I was like, oh, pre-chorus. Okay. So you have to, like, not only do you have to have a chorus, you also have to tell people that the chorus is on its way. And it's just like, oh my God, like, people are not that stupid, right? People are not as stupid as we are imagining, as we are pretending that they are. And I get it. They were saying, this is how you structure a song if you want it to get on the radio. And that's not how I structure my songs. And if they get on the radio, they get on the radio, and that's wonderful. But they are essentially an outlet for me to manage my own feelings.
Yeah. To that point too about radio, I just think that, and I mean, I do a weekly radio show for queer artists, and I mean, my whole thing is that I want to find what's unique and different that they don't hear on the radio, but it could live on the radio if radio wasn't so consumed. And I know it's a business, and I say this all the time, but radio is so consumed with numbers and dollars and that kind of thing to keep it going. But honestly, and I will say, Spring Flowers, to kind of go back to it for a minute, it is, and people may not think it's a dance song, but to me, it's a very dancey song because the quiet pieces are a very sexy dance. It's a push and pull on the dance floor that's very different. But there's a real sexuality that's in that song. The slow moments are beautiful, and then you get into what I call kind of a swank electro. There's a lot of swagger that comes in with the sounds, and it's so great that I wish, and I hope we do get there to the point, because technology is changing, that music finds more appeal on radio in different spaces, because I think right now it's very loggerheaded in a very specific 2 or 3 sounds that are kind of happening and kind of gets reproduced. And yeah, with pipes, well, that's what I meant by the beginning. I kind of wanted to go to Scotland, but I was like, but this isn't a bagpipe. But it was mysterious, but it was also really engaging, and I was just like, this is a great sound, and I hadn't heard that sound. I mean, you hear lots, but you don't necessarily take notice. But I hadn't heard that sound, so that was just kind of that interest of, where do you find these things and how do you play in those worlds?
I think that the thing about pipes is it also sounds like an alarm, right?
Yeah.
That sounds like an alarm, and I think for me at that time, that was what I needed. And I appreciate what you're saying about the Spring Flowers, and I think that's also how I approach my work. That like, if I think about a lot of the music that I like to dance to, it's not EDM, it's not 130 beats per minute, it's not that fast. It's way more like trip hop, Portishead, that kind of stuff. And it's a fine line between like sexy music and dance music. For me, they're very like closely related. And I dance in my studio a lot more these days. I wish, I have a nice little studio, and I really am grateful for it. And I wish it were bigger so that I could move around a lot more. And then the other thing that happened when I was writing this record is that before COVID times, I was putting together a playlist for a Super Butch event that I was doing. And it resulted in me just having an hour-long dance party by myself. And then I took that energy into writing that afternoon. And I thought, oh, this seems like something I should do to get ready. I know that I need to move my body and do yoga and go for walks and stuff before I write. But it was interesting to bring the energy of songs that I like to dance to my writing.
One of my mantras is, when in doubt, dance it out.
Totally.
If I'm ever blocked, if I'm ever confused, if I'm ever in a situation, or if I just need to kind of like just reset, dance for me is the way to go. And yeah, it's not EDM. For me, it's sounds that really kind of, I love organic. And I think that's probably why I like the record so much, that the sounds that are in there sound quite organic in terms of how they're composed, the composition of them, and also where you're kind of pulling from. I love that. One of the songs on the album I have to ask about is a Casey Musgraves song. And I'm curious why Casey Musgraves, and why that song in particular that you wanted to kind of cover and redo in your own style.
Yeah, I appreciate, thank you. I haven't gotten to talk about this cover yet, and I appreciate getting to talk about it. I thought it was going to be Rainbow. I don't know if you know her song Rainbow,
Yeah.
which I feel is like such a wonderful gay anthem, that there are just these queers walking around the world with these beautiful rainbows above our heads, and so for a long time I thought it was going to be that song. And then my cover of it just wasn't that interesting. And also, like, she just does it so beautifully that there was no point in me just trying to imitate her kind of ballad. But Slow Burn, I've been listening to for 3 years, like relatively steadily, and trying to cover it. And it wasn't working. And then I introduced this kind of shuffle. If people know her version and my version, they will realize the rhythm of mine is quite different. And then it just clicked, and I was like, oh, this is going to be the cover on the record. And I wanted there to be a cover, and it wasn't working. And then it was actually the last one that I finished, and I was really glad that there was going to be a cover. And I also think it's interesting to kind of sex her work up a little bit, because I actually think her songs are quite sexy. But she's working in very mainstream country music in the United States, and so it has to be very downplayed. But to me, Slow Burn is a very, very sexy song. And so I was excited to kind of bring some sexier beats to it, while, as you were talking about before, the end of my version of that song is I am actually almost just whispering. And that to me felt like the perfect relational thing to do in that moment.
I don't know if she's heard it. I don't know if you know if she's heard it.
I think it's very unlikely.
Hope she hears it.
I hope she hears it. Oh, wow.
I think you make a real valid point about her music, that there's Casey Musgraves is an artist who, she's working in mainstream country music, and she's not stupid about the kind of industry that she's working in. She's quite aware. She can be very vocal at times too about what she's passionate about, and the and the people that she's and the communities that she's passionate about. But she makes country music for her fans, and knowing full well, I would assume she has a real good grasp on the sexualization of it, because I think that probably in that mainstream country music, if they were really wanted to take it in a way, they would take it in the worst way. Not to throw country music, or especially the men in country music, under the bus, but I think that they would automatically look at it. It needs to be this type of hypersexualized, where you took it in a very different way and really made it. It's a heat, or it's a sex appeal that's really palpable, but at no point in time does it feel hypersexualized or over-sexualized. It just becomes, it's part of the sexuality of just, energy. And I hope she hears it. I really, really do, because I think she'd love it. I think she would die for that.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think that what you're talking about also comes from a kind of gender messing, right? A kind of messing with sounds, messing with gender, messing with power. And, my work is never going to be totally passive or totally aggressive, right? It's always going to be a bit of each. And the pace is always going to be somewhere in between. It's always going to be a little bit jazzy, right? Jazz can be very, very sexy. If we look at how like Nina Simone does it, I think people kind of think of jazz as like what plays in elevators, and fine, but there's very, very sexy jazz. And so, yeah, it would be great if she heard it. I think, this late in my career, or this far into my career, I feel like I've kind of had to give up on imagining that people I admire are going to hear my work, and just kind of make the work that I want to make. And if I want to send them records, I have a list of like people whose work I admire to send records to. And actually I should add Casey Musgraves to it once I get the vinyl in my hands, which I don't have yet. I don't expect to hear back from them. I think in my earlier days, I used to hear back from them. Like, I imagine I would hear back from them. Like, I'd be like, Natalie Merchant, can I be your backup singer? And now I just feel like it's more like, Hannah Gadsby, I think you're so great. Your work's been so important to me, and here's my record. It just seems like I don't want to live in an imaginary life, and I want to be in the one that I'm in.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think we want to. I think sometimes, like, listen to the records, you know, it does make you kind of want to be in that world. There's so much that's kind of happening there. My favorite, I think, I shouldn't say it's my favorite. I haven't, you know, listened to the album, like, you know, for days and days and days on end, but like right off the get-go, after the first few listens to, and it's because of the lyrics and it's because of how the song starts, is Barely. And the opening lyrics to that song for me, it's like, if you need a monologue to do on a stage for an audition, people should dive into that, because how, like, it's just so introspective about, you know, looking down at your body and half expecting it to be falling apart. And that's just like between the physical and the mental, deluge that we've experienced just in this 1 year. But when you really think about the past 4 or 5 years, between, you know, racial inequality and in the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matters and the United States and Brexit, there's been so much that we've been bombarded by, that it does take its toll. So listening to that song and hearing that right at the very beginning, and just you, and just minor sounds, I was like, it's breathtaking. So I just needed to tell you that. For me, that is such a beautiful track on the album.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I suspect I will cry talking about it. Sometimes I feel like it's my favorite song on the record. I think it is definitely the most emotional song on the record. And it comes from grief. And I think that's what a lot of people are experiencing in COVID, is a lot of grief. There's been a lot of loss of people and the things that we can't do anymore and the people we can't hug and kiss. And, you know, I'm going to record a radio set, I think today. And I am contemplating doing that song. And I'm like, remembering that when I used to play it live in front of actual people, like, I have to be prepared that for me to tear up and figure out if I'm going to be able to sing through that, or just give in, you know? And I think for me, it's like akin to when people in sketch comedy, like, break face and whatever it's called and start laughing, or yeah, I think, and I also think that song speaks to how hard it has been to release this record, and how long it has taken me, and why I sometimes regret it, because it's like, it is like, and I appreciate it so much, you receiving it in the way that you do, that you have, or that you were describing, because it's really weird to make art. It really is. It's so, when you make art in the way that I do, which is like putting my feelings into sound and giving it to people and asking people to care.
It's
So,
the album is almost a storybook, I would say. And the reason that I mean, there's many reasons for that song, but it was just those lyrics at the beginning, and then where you take that song, I was kind of like, the weight that is in there. Sometimes people think that a song, because, you know, it's going to deal with like heavy topics or grief or, you know, angst, have to be tortured. And this song could be no further from being tortured. It is just, it's so real that I think that it's like breathing. It's like the breath that is in it. If you take the time when you're listening to it and you just allow yourself to just hear the song, it's exquisite. It really is. So congratulations to you on that, because I think it's just absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. And I think the harmonies at the end, I think there's something in the harmonies at the end that, to me, like, carries the weight of the song, but not necessarily in an only a weighty way, you know. Yeah. I think in a bluesy and deep kind of way, and yeah, that I managed to get beats into that song. I really appreciate that the whole thing is not just weighty. And then the harmony, the panned harmonies at the end, there's some kind of blue note. I don't actually know what a blue note is, but I feel like maybe it's a blue note at the end where it's just like the intervals are really weird. Usually my intervals are quite simple.
It's uplifting is really where it is. And I think that kind of cuts through what you're talking about with that, with the weightiness of it. And
there's a little dance break. You actually can have a little dance break in the middle.
You catch yourself.
Yeah.
You catch your breath.
Yeah.
But it's, and then again, like going back to what I said, kind of coming into this was like the composition of the album, you know, there's so many artists, and I've said this to artists, to many of them, it's like you need to manage your expectations of what success looks like for you. And if success is only, you know, radio play and you know, being a name, if you are an artist, not that they're not, but if you are somebody who really puts so much of yourself into this and your personal life and, you know, the stories of yourself, you may feel that you have to compromise them sometimes, because of the way that music can be, you know, pushed out to the world. So you just need to manage those expectations of what success is. But when you have somebody who hits upon these things and whatnot, I mean, really, your art is touching people. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that your art is touching. So you I guess that's the best kind of takeaway from it, in a sense.
Well, and I am very, very underground.
Yeah.
Right. I have an office job. I appreciate that a few people are going to buy this record. I really do. I appreciate interacting with people about it. And I really appreciate getting to talk to you about it and getting to talk about my work. I appreciate it hugely. I think when people hear my work and they think it's good and they think it's interesting, they imagine that my career is somewhere that it isn't. And I think that that's probably the case with the vast majority of artists. I think people think if you make art that they think is good, then probably you're making a living at it. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. Like, I don't want to be at the party and be like, get off effing Spotify, you know, but like, we're not making any money. We aren't. And so I think I appreciate you talking about changing your expectations. This is a thing that has taken me 12 years. You know, I'm in year 13 of doing this work. I don't make any money at it still. And under capitalism, that's the way that we know that the work that we're making is valuable, right? And so
absolutely,
I have to change my expectations, which is if you tell me that you think it's great, or somebody emails me and says, I danced with my partner on our 20-year anniversary to this song of yours, then I say, well, great. You know, then I am doing the right thing. And if I have to be 50 years into this career and still not have made any money, it's hard. I'm not saying it's like, it's fine. I can have an office job forever. I don't feel that way. It's very hard. It feels very hard. I also feel very lucky that I get to do this work at all. I know that there are lots of people who don't get to do creative work at all.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I mean, the vast majority of people assume because you can record a song and put it out that it means you must have the, I'm not sure what level of either popularity or success that provides you the ability to do that. But 99.999% of the artists are 9 to 5 is what pays the bills and I live off of. After that, I make the art that gives me life, that, you know, that gives me my own home therapy, that makes things cathartic for me and gets some things out and actually helps other people when they hear it. You know, your music, I know a lot. And I think that as we age, we get better with this. And I try to say this to young people all the time. I'm like, don't wait until you get into your 40s to kind of go like, oh yes, maybe I should do this a little bit more. I'm like, start early, broaden yourself, look at the artists that are out there, but also realize that you probably have friends. Just because you think something is off center from what everybody else is listening to doesn't mean it's bad. It means that you just have found something in it. And I bet you any money, you have a lot of friends around you who would find something interesting in it too. share it, tell them about it, introduce them to it, become that cool kid who finds all the cool music and introduce your friends to it. I love what you said. One of the things that I did want to ask you about was, I believe the album is primarily or specifically only on Bandcamp and your website, correct?
Yep, that's right.
And I have to say, and I've been saying this a lot lately about myself, I said, we need to get the artists who are on Bandcamp and are staying there. I understand the draw to Spotify, and I talk about them all the time because you don't make any money off Spotify. It is a marketing tool per se, and that's pretty much it. You need to be, in such a high level of streams before you're actually even, making anything to be able to kind of compensate. But we need to, as outlets like myself, we need to get better at saying, the first stop that I want to take you to, you can find them on Spotify or whatnot if you're whatever, but we need to get better at saying, here's their website. Here's their Bandcamp if they're, if they don't have a website or if they're only selling on Bandcamp. Start there and you can stream and purchase there, rather than saying, okay, go over here and, go stream it from these playlists or whatnot. And I make playlists too, as a way to help artists be heard. But there's a mechanism, I think, that in outlets like myself, who, I look at the advocacy side of it or whatnot, we have to get better, because the industry's not going to change. They're always going to be looking for the best, the easiest way. Sorry if you're listening, industry, whoever your industry is. They're always going to be looking for the way to make the most money with paying the least amount. That is business. The GP percentage and all that that comes through. But for artists who are living, it's the Bandcamp, it's the websites. So I commend you for doing that, because it's always a good kick in the pants for someone like me who immediately goes to Spotify first and go like, I'm gonna go check out the album first, right? And now that it's dropped, it's kind of like, but it's not there. And it's kind of like, yeah, it's not there. And that's not where my first stop should be. So that is it's a signal that gets kind of like sent back to people like myself, and we have to get better at that.
Well, for me, it's a political decision, and it's also a practical decision. I have to spend $60 a year to distribute my previous albums, and there is no universe in which I will bring in $60 a year on those older records. And there's no way I'd bring in $60 a year streaming on this record. That's 1.5 million streams, which is, for someone like me, I'm nowhere near that. I'm lucky if I bring in $5 a year streaming, because the truth is that streaming on the big players pays us nothing. They pay us nothing. And people think, because it's not Napster, right? People think, oh, Napster's over. We're not taking the content for free. And I'm sure this is the same with big video streaming. I stream video through Netflix or whatever else, and I think, I'm sure these creators are not making any money. And my advice to go along with your excellent advice is, get as close to the artist as you can. Put your money as close to the artist as you can. So if there is a way that they are selling it that is closer to them, where the money is going to go directly to them, give it to them. Don't give it to corporations. And this is my advice for everything. Like, don't buy from Amazon. No, Jeff Bezos does not need any more money. Like, we don't need any. We need to not have billionaires. And so I would say, especially in this time when there's no touring, which is how musicians who make money as musicians make money. And I'm not one of those. I don't tour, and I mostly haven't. I would love to, but I can't afford it because it costs a lot of money. Yeah, I would say if the artist you like is on Bandcamp, find your artist on Bandcamp. If that's probably where the most interesting work is, because by the time it's up getting super famous on Spotify playlists, it's not going to be very interesting anymore, which is what we were talking about, right? It's supposed to appeal to everyone, which means it actually appeals to no one.
Well, there was a time when it was sought after to be those unique sounds and those unique artists. And then technology has been both a pro and a con. For sure it has. It has made it so much easier to do things like this, to be able to talk to artists, to help them get their stories out. It has made it so much easier to connect with people around the world, doing podcasts and that kind of thing. But it is also really, basically, taken away some of the mystery and some of the uniqueness of art and creativity. Talking to another kind of curator, they work with like finding queer artists, queer like visual artists. And we've been talking about, I'm like, I would love to see us do like combine together where you fit a really cool queer artist with a really cool visual artist and doing some kind of like online conceptual kind of galleries, rotating galleries. I'm like, there's so much that can be done to show that expression of art. But the technology has really, has gotten into our heads to kind of say, this is the stream over here. This is the world that we're all supposed to kind of want to stay in. And if you go outside of it, well, you won't have the same, I don't know what numbers, this, that, or the other thing. It doesn't change the fact that the art is still good. The work that's putting into it, the concepts are far more dynamic. And the learning, the education that you get from it is incredible. So we need to, I think we need to rewind ourselves over to a few spaces to get back to some of that.
Well, and I would make the, I would encourage a larger analysis that this is not just artists, right? This is farmers, this is people who make things, this is people who clean, people who build things. Like, you know, it's mostly not the people who make things who are making money, right? It's the people who make money from money, and it's a totally messed up system, and it's going to destroy everything. So it's like there's no. So on that note, yeah, I would say put your money as close to actual people who are making things as you can. And even if it doesn't allow me to quit my office job, it does give me $10 that I can save up and spend on new music gear, right? I do try to keep that, like, if I'm going to make money back from this record, which I probably actually won't even cover the costs of, I will put it back into my studio because I want to, and I need some new gear. It's time for some new gear. So yeah.
Well, I mean, fingers crossed, because I think that if COVID has taught me anything, other than completely switching careers and giving me the room to be able to do something like that, it's taught me that in this world of independent artists are at least far more, I don't want to say ready, but they're far more able to adapt into this COVID world, because they've always had to scramble. They've always had to be do-it-yourselves. They've always had to kind of like look at it and say, well, the likelihood is this, but we'll give it a shot, you know, kind of anyway. That I think that they've been able to think a little bit smarter with things. And I'm hoping that 2021 is where that independent artist kind of, you know, the steel within them really starts to shine and really comes back. I hope. Now that I'm an idealist, we'll see.
Well, if it results in the death of these kind of mega music festivals and kind of brings about more local, smaller things, I mean, there's no question that would be helpful for people like me who don't, I don't play Oshiga, right? Probably no one's ever going to ask me to play Oshiga. And probably, I don't know if I'd want to. I can't imagine what it's like to play for this sea of humans who you can't have any relationship with at all. So yeah, I was talking to a friend about that maybe in summer 2021, with COVID still with us, festivals will be quite a bit smaller. And for me, that's more my scale, you know, which isn't to say I wouldn't like to go on a world tour. Well, I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, there are environmental implications. Should musicians be flying all over the world? It doesn't really make any sense. It's not good for our bodies. It's not good for our relationships. So in some ways, I think a lot of musicians who stayed home and went on CERB were like, oh, this is actually the most money I've ever made, right? It's like, oh, I'm making $2,000 a month. Usually I tour and I come out with $1 if I'm lucky.
Well, I mean, hopefully, I mean, it's a different world. You know, having vaccines coming or pseudo vaccines and that doesn't change the fact that it's going to take a long time before any of this kind of settles. I know that there's minds at work in the background that are thinking, well, you know, how do we adjust to a world where maybe we won't have these kinds of festivals? And I get my little message from Facebook every day saying, you should host an online event. You can make money from an online event. And it's just like, yeah, but you know what? You make the money. I get it. You don't want it to be the artists that make the money. You'll restrict the artist, but you're not restricting me. Interesting. But people, we just need to be a lot more aware of that stuff. And really thinking about, I think that you're very right in terms of the expression, keep the money as close to the artist as possible. I think that, you know, it's kind of almost like taking ourselves back to the days of bartering, in a sense where I know you, I have something, we can help each other out kind of thing. Like I will keep the money close to you and maybe we can kind of work something out and that kind of thing. Because if technology is doing anything, it's allowing ourselves and artists to communicate closer, and on more specialized kind of projects that I think in the long run would help out more people.
Yeah, and I remember when I realized that if I saw a musician I liked at a show that I was also playing or a festival that I was also playing, that we could trade CDs.
Yeah.
I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is exactly what I want to do with my CDs. It's like trade it for one of my favorite things, right? Which is other people's music. Yeah, I mean, obviously this economic system isn't working for most people. And so I try to participate in ways that are as ethical as I can. But that doesn't mean I'm not gonna solve it. I'm certainly not gonna solve it. And also I'm like a bike riding pinko, right? I'm like a butch lesbian who gets around on a bicycle. So like, of course I'm going to try to pay artists because I'm an artist. Like it makes sense for me. I think the point is to try to get other people to realize. And I really try to not do this at parties when there were parties. But like I'll go to a party or a gathering at a house of someone I know who's an artist. And what's playing at their house is Spotify.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do in that situation because I want to get invited to gatherings and parties. It's not that I want to be like sitting alone by myself.
It is a struggle. I mean, you are in a very different kind of position when it comes to something like that. The rest of the world takes it for granted. Well, they're also uneducated, and we have not educated and been loud enough in terms of the education. And you know, recently. You know, not to keep bagging on them, but I do it a lot. They're probably going to take me out at some point in time. But you know, to make this whole announcement of how they're looking at, well, we're going to change the adjustment things so that if you do, and I can't remember exactly what it was, you'll make more in some kind of way. But I was just like, oh my God, it's offensive. It's offensive to the artist, but everyone else who's so uneducated on these things will kind of be like, oh, that's really great of them. It's like, no, it's not. But I digress on that. 2020 is coming to a close. We're not
what
in
a
the woods
shit show,
just
man.
yet. What are your hopes for 2021? I mean, again, we don't know what things are going to be looking like, but you know, what are you looking forward to or looking towards 2021 for just as an artist from your own kind of standpoint?
I'd really like to have some kind of release show for this record. You know, it feels weird to have worked on something for so long and then only put it out on the internet. I feel like I would like to sing it for people in front of them. You know, I feel concerned about how it's going to be to get venues. I don't know if it's going to be possible for me to get venues, so we'll see. But yeah, I'd like to have a show. Unfortunately, my drummer just moved to Dartmouth, so that's a problem. So we might have to do some East Coast shows.
Come visit.
Yeah, well, I miss the East Coast. I used to play the East Coast a lot back in the dead of winter days, and I do miss it out there. So yeah, I'd like to do that. I'd like to go back to the East Coast and play some shows. It's funny because shows are not the easiest thing for me, but having had them taken away, I'm kind of like, well, now I want to do them because it's how you meet people. It's how you meet other artists.
I've been encouraging
Yeah.
folks to really consider as like, as you come out of COVID, and you are still concerned about things, and maybe you're not feeling like you want to go out as much. I said, that doesn't mean that your space isn't a proper place to be able to host a house concert, a small house concert with an artist. I'm like, if you are a lover of live music, that intimate type of environment helps you by not having to go too far. And it also helps the artist by having an actual venue that they can play in, so that they can, get some material out there, get some footage or whatnot, and you can introduce them to the people. So I've been encouraging people to kind of really start thinking about that, them as a venue holder, and what that could look like. I'm not saying every Friday night, but for birthdays, for special occasions, there is a few networks around Canada who they do little mini tours. They'll look for artists to do mini tours through their living rooms, the couch tours, and I think it's just we have to, as you are thinking, and being challenged to think differently about how you're going to utilize your music and roll it out. I think we as consumers need to be a little bit smarter too, and think about how do we become part of that solution, and not just stand on the sidelines. Don't be a bystander. Don't be a bystander in any respect, but really kind of think about what that means in this arena.
Yeah, and I think there are going to be probably a lot more DIY kind of spaces when we come out of this, because a lot of the smaller venues have gone under. And I think it's the same with a lot of queer bars. It's like places that were operating with really, really low, really small margins are not going to come out of this, right? So we're going to have to go back to having queer bars in our basements and concerts in our living rooms. And I think that's okay, right? Speaking of money, I mean, it's not okay because I'm sure lots of venue owners are lovely. And it's not that I want venues to go out of business. It's just a lot of venues are inaccessible to those of us who aren't big or don't have tour managers or don't have agents or, it's, yeah.
Well, I mean, and and even my group of friends, we said this year, before this was pre-COVID, after last year's New Year's and whatnot, and we do something together every year. We said, why are we spending probably $120 per person, say, by doing this, that, or the other thing on dinners and all that? If we put all that money together, we could do what we actually want to do. And we could actually host a live show. We could actually get a venue and actually have in a couple of artists, and then we can invite people to it. And I'm like, why don't we spend our money more constructively and have it, go further? Have it stretch further rather than just doing the same old, because it's the easiest thing to do. So
make your own party.
Exactly. So hopefully after COVID.
Yeah. I'm in.
Listen, this has been awesome. I can't stress enough how beautiful I think the album is. How it's introspective, it's sexy, it's insightful. It's deep, but it's also energetic. Like it's all over the place. And like I said, it's a little bit like a storybook. And I love the fact that it does take you on a journey from like right across all of the tracks. So we don't have enough of that happening in music anymore. And I think we need to kind of get back to that. I miss the days of liner notes and, hearing the whole story of an album and, how it relates to my life. And I love that. And I do find it a piece of storytelling that's done in a very Dinah Thorpe way.
Thank you. And thank you for listening to it so carefully. I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate that I'm not the only one who likes to listen to albums from start to finish.
Oh Lord, it gets me very excited. I love a good bop, don't get me wrong.
For sure. For sure, a one-off pop hit, why not? There's nothing wrong with a one-off pop hit.
I love to spin around, me and my cats. But to me, music is storytelling, and it's in a musical format. And there may be 3 stories in an album, 3 short stories, or it may be 1 long novel. But there's stories that are in there, and there's a richness. And I always look at it what I can take away, I can reflect on how it connects to me personally. So, and this one is just, the light and shade I get very excited about.
Thank you. It's a good way to think of it. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Thank you so much for joining me. I will
Thank
return
you.
you to your life in lovely Toronto. I lived there for a number of years, and then came back to the East.
Yeah.
But you know, and I wish you all the best with the album. I know that people are going to be listening to it. I know I'm going to be, you know, sending links to a lot of people, and already have started. People get annoyed with me. They're like, "Stop sending me things." But you know,
You can send them to me if they get annoyed with you.
I will. And congratulations on it. I just
Thank
think
you.
it's a pretty phenomenal and fantastic piece.
Thank you for receiving it so kindly.
All right, I return you to your life, and enjoy your time before the holidays. Enjoy your holidays, and we will see you in 2021.
The spring flowers full of bees. The early sunshine, the birds